what you wanted. He said, I said, that's not your house. You say, hey.
Yeah. What you wanted, it's all yours.
Good evening, everyone. With a quorum of the board present, both in person and online, call the March 8th meeting of the Board of Education to order. And we begin, please join me with the pledge to the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We're going to begin this evening with two presentations. The first is going to be a budget presentation with Mr. Whittemore.
Okay, as we are about the midpoint of the budget process, we're getting close to the end. There's some major pieces that we'll be recommending the board act on tonight, including the notice, which has a lot in it. So we want to present the budget, which we talked a little bit at the workshop a couple weeks ago, and sort of dive into those details a little bit more.
Can I just hold on a second, John? Are we having audio issues? Tim Weaver sent me notes that sound is going in and out. Is that a local thing or?
It looks good on my end.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. If there are continued problems, let us know because we can work on that instead. So the referendums that are within that notice that will recommend the board act on the annual budget, pointing out again, it will require 60% approval this year. 3 school buses, again, talking to the board about switching from a diesel to a gas fleet, which is cheaper for the school district. And there's 2 seats for the Board of Education. The one seat being a 5-year term, and the other seat being, it's a little bit different where that term would begin immediately after the officer would take the oath of office. It would run through June 30th through 2025. So just a little bit over a 4-year term. This budget in a lot of ways is a lot like budgets from years past. There's nothing really extraordinary in this budget other than the need for a higher voter approval in terms of the threshold of passing the budget. The majority of the budget is consistent with what you would expect in a school budget, and that is instruction. So over the last 2 years of audited financial statements, 2018-19 and 19-20, the majority of the expenditures for the school district have fallen into that instructional bucket. Benefits between the instructional staff and non-instructional staff making up the other significant amount of the budget. Things like general support have a large budget component. It's hard to see from these bar charts, but last year's general support was a little higher, in part because of some of the additional COVID expenditures we've had. Over the last really 4 years, we've had small capital projects within the budget itself. That has helped the district keep up with systems that were getting towards the end of their useful life. And so we continue that in the current budget offering for next year. Transportation has been a very consistent part of the budget as well, keeping around that 5% mark for the transportation. And then debt service over the next couple of years. And we'll talk a little bit more about debt service, but one thing I wanted to talk about with debt service actually next year is increasing a little bit. I think that was a bit of a disconnect between the presentation last time and sort of what the audience heard. But debt is not going down next year, debt's actually going up. And that has some complexity with the tax cap in terms of other pieces of the tax cap. So one of the items that we've been successful at as a school district with the Board of Education support is to continue with these smaller capital projects. The middle school roofs are leaking. There are roofs that need to be replaced that were put in 1992. Those roofs are 30 years old. They'll be past that number once by the time state actually approves this work. And without that work getting completed, those roofs will continue to leak. We're capturing about 10% of the roofs that have been identified as being needed replacement. So we're asking for a small amount of the total roofs that need to be replaced. The total cost of the roofs is around $600,000 to $700,000 to replace these roofs at the middle school. They're 30 years old. They've served the district well, but at this point they are failing in many places, and water is coming through in certain parts of the classrooms and hallways, and they need to be replaced. So what we're going to ask for the board to approve is a $1 million transfer of assigned fund balance to pay for this roof. And that's a really important concept about fund balance. When you have fund balance, it's a result of the revenues from that year being higher than expenses from the year before. We had some of that situation last year where school was not operational, and that resulted in part of us having a fund balance. It's important to have a small amount of fund balance to spend there's a variety of reasons. One of them can be to do capital work. So that is where we would suggest that the board make this transfer using unassigned fund balance, using assigned fund balance. So when we have the tax levy increase, the approximate number of a tax levy increase that we're putting out to the community at a 2.5% increase is about $900,000 of new money that will come into the school district. And where does that money go? Really simply, it goes into contractual salaries and benefits related to those contractual salaries. Really for the staff that's really already here, in terms of health insurance, retirement costs. So most of any sort of new money we bring in through the levy is already spent under the current staffing structure that we have. There are different concepts about budget and actual. This is really looking at actual money. We know what the levy is going to be. We know what the projected salary is going to be for the staff that's here. We really know what those benefits have typically been year after year. So the new money is really accounted for the salary and the benefits of the employees. It's really behind the scenes, but it is exciting successes for the school district in terms of what's happening with the debt. So this room we're standing in, this wonderful project that was completed and voted on by the voters, was in 5 years of bond anticipation notes, which are short-term debt issuance to pay costs like the contractors, legal expenses, architect, construction management. And so those roll over sometime between a 3 and 5 year period. The district has had those for a 5 year period, but we're statutorily required to transition them to long-term bonds. And that is happening in the next budget. The next budget cycle will happen in July. What is important about that, and I think you'll see this in some of the other items of the budget, is that's actually going up a little bit related to those long-term bonds. But the local share for this project is actually less than what was advertised to the citizens of Queensbury. So that when school districts go out for projects, they talk about a local share. state aid is a piece, and then the local share is the difference. So essentially the debt to create the project, and that's cut into two pieces, either state aid or the local contribution. So due to some of the structuring of our financing, due to historically low interest rates on some of this debt, the cost of the project itself, of that local share, was approximately $1 million less than we had anticipated. A piece of the capital project that is confusing, I think it's part of some of this dialogue, that I want to spend a little bit of time with and kind of show where our options are and why we were on this path. There's a piece of the tax cap calculation that school districts have control over. Most of it is just sort of formulaic. It's either inflation or it's pilots or things that are outside of school district control. But in the coming year, how the district structures its debt and some of the aid impacts their ability to levy. And that's called the capital exclusion the next year. So it's essentially eligible capital expenses, either a project or debt, minus offsets of aid or fund balance. And that results in the net capital expenditure. And the district has had a consistent net capital expenditure over the last several years. The debt's been one number, subtract aid, and you come up with about this $3 million. It's been pretty consistent over the last 3 years. But what is happening in next year is it's decreasing to $2.4 million. And that's a result of a couple factors. But one of those factors is not that debt is decreasing, debt's actually increasing a little bit. So I want to walk through that math. It is confusing, but I think being transparent with it will help some of this conversation. So our debt is increasing about $200,000, as in part going into the long-term issuance of the bond anticipation notes, but that's a pretty immaterial number to the overall size of the $40 million project. We do have this increase in capital expenditures. That's an increase of $300,000. Last year, there was a security project at the middle school. Now we're proposing the roof project at the middle school, but we are increasing a higher budget to ensure that the roofs are fixed. We're using less debt service fund balance, so when the district issues debt, some of that money goes into a debt service fund balance. We're using less of that in next year, but we're using more general fund balance. What I was talking about before is that fund balance that from having revenues being higher than expenses, using some of that. And we have this sort of one-time situation where there's an increase in building aid in next year, and that's a result of the emergency projects that the district went through. We had a small amount of asbestos which needed remediation. We had the issues with the boilers from earlier in the year. We expend that money in this fiscal year, that aid comes back in the next year. So it ultimately ends up in a reduction in the formula of our net capital expenditure of $800,000. So last year, the net capital expenditure was $3.2 million. This year is decreasing by $800,000. The net capital expenditure becomes $2.4 million, which results in the need for the tax cap override. Really the only difference that we could explore as a district in terms of having a simple majority would be not using fund balance to fix the roofs. We could seek that through the taxation of the school district, but we would end up in the same spot. Debt would still be increasing related to the long-term debt. We still need to fix the roofs. We are going to plan to use less debt service. If we were to strike through that general fund piece, that would change the numbers, but we still have that emergency aid coming in. So looking at it, we'd be looking at that small capital exclusion piece again of $3.4 million under a simple majority, but it'd be about the same tax levy growth, about 2.5. So either way, the tax levy growth is very similar in either scenario. So again, tax levy projected for 2021-22, $37.16 million. Last year's levy, $36.258 million. That's a 2.5% growth, but the taxable allowable levy is actually a small decrease. It's almost flat. So we're above our projected tax cap calculation, but at the same time, that 2.5 levy, 2.5% increase used to pay for operations. So enrollment is a big factor in terms of illustrating what we're doing with costs. Our costs are people. Typically, the costs are teachers. And so as enrollment has decreased every year, sort of seeing one of those higher points in 2009-10, we have also made adjustments to staffing. There are less instructional staff and to a certain extent less some support staff where it's appropriate in terms of salary costs for the district. So to illustrate here, there's two vertical axes, but the top bar is instructional costs off the audited financial statements. So every year you can see the instructional expenses increasing. This is a result in large part due to negotiated contract settlements within the bargaining unit. So you see the increase year after year building into the instructional costs. But what there are less of are instructional staff. So in 2015, there were approximately 280 teachers here making those numbers there. Those numbers are not just salary, there's other items in there, but they're mostly salary. As enrollment has decreased, the district has made a real conscious effort to decrease the number of instructional staff in order to keep class size in line with historic practices, ensuring that the same number of teachers are here for the same number of students. I always ask this question, so I put it on this slide. What is the cost of administrative contracts? And that is the bar at the bottom there. So you can see instructional increases over time due to the step schedules, but there are less teachers here. Health insurance is a major item. Health insurance has escalated beyond what the inflation rate is. Major concessions with the bargaining units in 1819, but even though we've taken that step back contractually in terms of cost, the escalation is there again. So we have this increase, it's increasing faster than the inflation rate. So there has to be a revenue source to pay for those contractual revenues, contractual expenses, and the benefit expenses. So every year over the last 7 years, the tax levy increase has been just below 3% to keep up with that pace. What we would propose for next year is a 2.5% increase. The 7-year average is, again, just below 3%. So this increase is slightly less than in years past. So to look at revenues, and I've adjusted some of the state aid revenues. When I say state aid, I'm considering the fact that federal revenues will flow through as a state aid pass-through. I will, to a certain extent, believe what our state aid is once we actually have it, but these are the numbers we are projecting now. The levy is the levy, and so what we propose for next year's growth in terms of revenue is that 2.2% budget increase with a 2.5% levy increase. We are proposing an increase in appropriated fund balance. Some of that is a budgeting tool, but some of it is a plan to spend it on using it to repair the roofs. This is a really important slide. We show the slide sometimes and sometimes get away from it, and I want to bring it back. Queensbury ranks very, very favorably in terms of expenditure per student. Expenditure per student is one measure of a school's fiscal health. We rank right next to Guilderland, Saratoga, Queensbury is there, which is obviously North Carolina. Now, those are high-performing schools, but they also spend similar amounts per student. It is harder to be much lower than 90. 90 is the lowest in terms of what they rank these schools. And so we're right there at the bottom of expenditure per student. Cutting much more, we think would impact the educational program negatively. So that's why you don't see too much on here in this budget in terms of cuts. But we do look at enrollment, and maintaining enrollment levels and staffing levels consistent with enrollment allow for the expenditure per student to be low. In terms of those expenditures, generally a budget very similar to last year. Instruction with a small increase. We will hold general support flat in terms of this budget. Small increase in transportation. Again, debt increasing. How it flows, the tax cap calculation is different, but the debt is increasing a little bit. Benefits, it is the challenge that the Board of Education is tasked with helping us solve in terms of what the cost growth is for the district. That transfer of capital, the roof is leaking, we're asking for that fund balance used to fix that roof. And then the total is 69.1 million, just a little bit over 2% in terms of a total budget increase. So we asked the board to act on some of the notice items. On the 22nd, we have a workshop, which will consist of a more detail of what some of these budget codes are. It will be very similar to the year before, and just really reflecting increases in the contractual costs. We meet individually with the buildings in different departments to flesh out some of those numbers, but most of it is salary and benefits. Then on the 12th is the budget adoption, May 10th is the public hearing, and then right around the corner is the actual vote itself. I appreciate the board's patience as I went through some of that math. Is there any questions or anything I can answer?
Anyone on the board have any questions for Mr. Whittemore? Any members online?
No questions, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Whittemore. The next presentation is going to be about students that have been returning to school. And for that, we're going to have Mr. Gannon, Mr. Brannigan, and Mrs. Strollstrup. Please.
Good evening. Just going to pull the presentation.
Eleanor? Yes, who lost it too?
Board of Education. Tonight, we're really excited to talk about our students and bringing students back to school on a daily basis. So we want to give a brief overview of what that plan looks like. And if you can remember, in the summer, we were talking all about preparation for bringing kids back, and we had Spartan Safe and all of these protocols in place. And really one of the things that the state asked us to do is they said, be prepared to be flexible. And we did that. And so that's really the lens that we're looking at right now. We're trying to get ahead of things and saying, how can we get more students to come back when we have the room to do so? So we'll do that in the same way, and that will be flexible, we'll be prepared, and we'll stay connected, and at the same time, just in making sure that we're staying Spartan safe. Just as a quick review, it's important to look at our models of instruction that we've had. So K through 6, we've had daily in-person as well as remote learning. 7 through 12, we have had hybrid, so every other day instruction, and also remote learning. And then we've also had just K through 12 students who have been learning completely remotely. So what we'd like to do is where we have room to bring those students who have been hybrid learning every other day to give them an opportunity to come back. So if we take a look at the next slide, what you'll see is how the effort really went into discussing with our parents and our students how to really go about this. So it was really a great team effort to really reach out to the student level through Google Classroom and parent surveys, finding out who would be interested in coming back. And it's important to note that we also looked at teacher recommendations and counselor recommendations for students who might have been struggling. So although this seems new, Mr. Gannon will speak about this all the while, where there have been students at risk, we have been having those students come back to school. Now we know we need to be flexible. So what does that look like? There are certain times where there might be plenty of room in a classroom to invite a student back. And then there might be times where we need to make room adjustments. We might have to modify schedules for students, look at different sizes. Where can our students fit in the lunchroom? And where might we actually have a little remote learning within our building in order to accommodate students? But those are just the things that we're willing to do and roll up our sleeves and work together as a team to bring the students back. And we know there are more challenges, and so Mr. Gannon is going to speak about one of those challenges, and which is transportation, but I first think he's going to give you a glance at what this looks like right now.
So I could not be more proud to look at this picture tonight. If you were to have walked through our high school throughout this time, you would have seen small class sizes due to our hybrid model and our remote learning model. But this is this week, this is today. This is a picture from one of our classrooms. You can see the kids are there. You can see the thumbs up in the back of the room. I could not be more proud to see the students coming back, really starting to open our doors. And with that excitement, Mr. Brannigan and I are going to talk about a few things that we have run into, a couple challenges that we wanted to share with the board. And one specific challenge as we work through the numbers tonight and show you, we have our middle school and our WHBI run. So it's our 4th grade through 8th grade run. If you remember correctly, it was 22 students that were allowed on our 66 passenger buses, unless in that 4th through 8th grade you had a sibling. If you had a sibling, then you could put 2 students in a seat. However, if you didn't, 22 was the maximum capacity for our school buses. That still exists right now, so we've spent a great deal of time. Mrs. Martindale's worked really hard, her whole transportation crew, Mr. Brannigan, myself, Mr. Luthringer, and Kat Zubel, who do the data for the district, and we've really tried to figure out how to come up with another way to transport our students that cannot find transportation on that 4th through 8th grade run. It is not an issue on our 9 through 12 run, and our K3 runs are tighter. But the 4th through 8th grade, almost all seats are taken unless it may be a singleton on a ridge run route or something of that nature. So we ran into, when we surveyed and started to bring our students back, we had to come up with other options. So one option that we came up with to present to our families was that a 4th through 8th grade student, but right now specifically our 7th and 8th grade students that we're looking at bringing back from the hybrid model, we looked at bringing them in on our high school run because there were seats on that run, and they would be dropped off at the middle school between 7:15 and 7:30. Mr. Brannigan would have a location, RFI gym and cafeteria, where students would receive breakfast waiting for school to start a half an hour to 45 minutes later. But in line with that, there are 6 blocks at our middle school. Their day would be finished after 5 blocks. Their 6th block, the bus would pick them up at the middle school, bring them over to the high school to hop on their high school run, and they would, on their phone, log on to their last class to watch on their way home. So they would get 5 out of their 6 classes in person. This would allow us to bring the students in. If you remember correctly, we have an 8-day rotational block schedule at our middle school. So that last class would be once every 8 days that they would be doing that for, but that was one creative solution that we came up with. Mr. Brannigan?
Thank you, Mr. Gannon. Thank you, Board of Education. To echo what Mr. Gannon was talking about, this opportunity also, I want to be able to extend a thank you to all of our families for supporting our learning platforms this year so far. And as you'll see in a few slides coming up, we're very excited to be welcoming almost 200 students back to the middle school for daily in-person instruction safely. And so that does come with some challenges. We've had some great communication with families. Again, hats off to our transportation department, our school counselors, Kat Zubel, and the data coordination department for really helping us give the talking points and having those talking points for our families to try to present some of these options to maximize our daily in-person learning. So like Mr. Gannon was saying, we are looking at obviously students that are being brought in by their families, that transportation, we're making those connections and those arrangements are obviously being made in a more seamless fashion, but then to explore the opportunities for the coming in early and providing the breakfast. We're also looking at trying to provide some instructional time during there with some math labs and things like that for students, particularly our 8th graders in preparation for algebra regions and such and state assessments as they come. And then also looking at if a student does have to take transportation, leaving block 5, leaving the instructional day slightly early, like Mr. Gann was saying, trying to bridge that gap with instruction on the bus, which isn't necessarily ideal, but it still keeps those students connected. and it isn't the same class that would be dropped every day. So we're having those conversations with families, but also extending our day potentially to 3:40 if there's a student that can be picked up at a little bit later time by a parent, or if they have a sibling in the elementary school that they can ride on. So we're really trying to expand and maximize the time that we have and the opportunities to ultimately meet with our students, as many students as we possibly can. So transportation is just it's an amazing entity that helps us really kind of get the kids into the building. And again, can't say enough for all the efforts of Sherry Martindale and her department to try to help us with the transportation.
This afternoon, we did invite public health down, specifically Dan Durkee came down as a Warren County Public Health representative, and we showed how we actually disinfect and clean our buses. We looked at solutions, Mr. Keys, myself, Mrs. Martindale, and at this point in time, that 22 passenger limit is what we're faced with. So these are solutions. They can come early to school or stay late after school in order to finish their day. We're doing whatever we can to try and maximize that. When you look at this was our timeline. So we looked at it in September. We knew we were opening our doors. On February 22nd, we offered all hybrid learning students in grade 12 the chance to come back full-time in person. Grade 11 was March 1st. Grade 10 was today. And then next Monday, all hybrid learning students have the ability to come back full-time in person, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. We've been bringing all of our students back that have, are at-risk students throughout the school year, teacher recommendations, and things like that. When I show you the numbers, these are still our remote learners, still our students that are at home, do not come to school, and so they will have that option. We will be putting that out next week for the 4th quarter for these students to have the chance to come back too. These two graphs are identical. I like to look at things on a line graph. Some people like to see things on a bar graph, but they're the same data set. So you can see at kindergarten, we have 20 students that are all virtual, full remote learners. And you can see at 1st grade, we're just a hair above there. And the chart works up all the way to 6th grade when you can see where it's still under 50 students, all virtual. So our in-person learning every day, the majority of our students are here. However, when you get to 7th grade, you can see that we start to peak above 60. And when you get to 9th grade, as of next Monday, or as of still today, we have about 58 students in 9th grade. 10th grade spikes. There's a spike in 10th grade. We're above 90 students that have elected to be full virtual and are still there at this point in time. And you can see 11th and 12th grade. So those are our full remote learning students by grade level. When you take a look, this is what 11th and 12th grade look like. I'll start with 12th grade on the right. So the left-hand bar are our everyday students, students that are here, have elected to be here every day. So we have about 85 students in 12th grade that are here every day. Our hybrid learner are students that chose not to come back every day, that they still wanted to remain hybrid, is just under 100, and our all virtual students that are seniors are just above 85 students. On the left, you can see that's 11th grade. We have everyday students over 100. We're about 105, 106 students there. Hybrid, still 90, and our all virtual students are 73 or thereabouts. 10th grade is that spike that I spoke about. We have about over 100 students every day in person, and our hybrid, we're still at 62. What that means when I say hybrid, so you can tack on roughly 31 students to each day, on top of our everyday students. So the split isn't perfect, but our all virtual students that are sophomores are just above 90. So that's a high number. When you look at 9th grade, I want to show you this line. Our everyday students, as of now, before we had offered to let our hybrid students come back, we're just under 50 students every day in 9th grade. We have 130 students that have elected to be here full-time starting next Monday. That's a great arrow, and that's an arrow that I'm proud of. However, we still have about 145 students that have said, I want to remain hybrid. I want to come every other day, and that model works for me, and a much lower number of virtual students, as you can see.
As you can see from this chart, that arrow continues to point in that direction. That shows that more of our students coming every day. For 8th grade, we're going to be bringing back about 90 students to everyday learning. So we're really excited about that trend for the middle school as well. And I just shut the presentation. There we go. Sorry about that. And then continuing for 7th grade as well, you can see the trend for and the commitment for our everyday learners going from grade from just under 40 everyday learners that we have currently to about 145 every day. And then as you're aware, our 6th grade, we have about 200 students that have been coming daily in-person instruction since the fall. So when we add up all these numbers, on Monday, March 15th, we'll be welcoming 65% of the middle school students to everyday in-person instruction. So we're really excited about that opportunity, and obviously taking on some of the challenges to ensure that we have all the space and ensuring the safety. So when we're talking about furthering our efforts, bringing students back, we've mentioned a few times, obviously, bringing our students back in person safely, and our continued partnership with Warren County Public Health and all the guidance that they give us and everything in our commitment to Spartan Safe will help us ensure that we meet that goal. We're also in planning K through 12 to ensure that we have a valuable in-person summer instruction program for our students, bringing back our K-6 Summer Success Program, in addition to our 7-12 Regional Summer Academy that we hosted for many, many years. And then obviously to strengthen the wellness of our school community, bringing back our students and forging those in-person relationships are going to be so crucial moving forward. So those are our goals that we have throughout the rest of this spring to ensure that we're maximizing opportunities for in-person learning. And then finally, communication, like Mr. Gannon said earlier, looking at our 100% virtual families and inviting back for Q4 instruction. So shortly we'll be getting some communication out to them. And then continuing to work with transportation through those challenges that we're facing with busing to ensure that our students are making it here safely. So we're going to be strengthening our parent partnerships and working closely with parents to see how we can mitigate through those transportation challenges so we can give those students opportunities to be here every day. And like I said, the Warren County Public Health guidance, maintaining our safe environments, what we've been doing in our classrooms and our buses and our common areas has just been amazing with the everlasting commitment that we've all had from students to faculty, staff, and everyone with remaining Spartan safe. With these challenges might also become some opportunities that we're going to need to seek to ensure they have proper staffing, instructional staff, and making sure that we have the people on board to make sure we meet the demand of our students coming back and that we can do it safely, requiring possibly some more learning spaces throughout the building, requiring possibly more staffing needs. I just wanted to get on that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Brannigan. The reason we put in more staffing needs, we want to let the Board of Education know that some of our classrooms, specifically at the K-5 level, we have maxed out as far as the number of students that can fit in our learning spaces with their classroom teachers. So we do know for the final 10 weeks, if students choose to come back fully remote, that we may end up hiring teachers and/or support staff to make it through the last 10 weeks and provide our students with the best learning situation that we can. So those are pieces that we are eyeing as we move forward. But does the board have any questions about any of the information they've heard?
Any questions? Kathy?
Thanks for putting so much time and thought and effort into this, because I think that's been our goal all along. We just want to get kids back in school. Can you just explain to me that last block in middle school again? Because what's going through my head is I'm wondering, how long is a block? How long are these students on the bus? So is that last block potentially being interrupted, that they're not getting the full instructional time of that block? And what if it's a phys ed class? How are you handling that?
Yeah, but you are right on the money, Mrs. Holzer. We realize that some bus trips, so by the time we get a student over to the high school, we've talked about 2 to 3 buses would come over and pick our middle school students up and bring them. Our high school buses queue right here in front of the high school, and they would be dropped off at the sidewalk to get on their bus. So by the time they get on their bus, that 6th block class probably would have started. And we would work with our teachers. They would know specifically which students have this and are faced with this. And they would have to work with those students potentially, setting up what's happening in the class ahead of time. If you have a 15-minute ride, you may be getting off your bus and you may be home. And if it's a beautiful day, you could sit on your front step and watch your last class and potentially do it there. However, a student that has a much longer ride, the good news is the high school buses are quiet. We do have low ridership on our high school buses. And so if you were to get on a high school bus, you would see that that's probably a fairly easy place for a student to be able to learn, but a hard place to do a math problem. So we know we're faced with that challenge. Physical education would be a missed class. So that's why we've offered for parents, if they can get here by 3:40, we would allow the student to stay after school. And so we would extend their learning day so they could attend their 6th block. We've tried just about everything. So yes, they would be here early and they could end up being here till 3:40 if a parent or someone could get here to pick them up by 3:40. We've also looked at those elementary runs to see if they could sit with a sibling. So if it just so happened that a 7th and 8th grade student had a sibling on the elementary run, we could put them on that elementary run in the same seat as their sibling and still meet that as well. It's a lot of factors, but yes, and the block is 58 minutes, Mr. Brannigan? 57 minutes. Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to add to that, there is that, if that student who has to leave after block 5 is arriving anywhere between 7 and 7:20 on a high school bus, there is about a 45 to 50-minute block of time that we really need to capitalize on that for either previewing content or providing support or allowing students that opportunity to kind of offset that missed instruction that might occur from missing block 6. And those are the conversations we're going to be having with parents too, as we really kind of dial in on how many impacts there are there, and really working closely to make sure that we provide the best instruction for that missed opportunity this time.
I guess a follow-up to that. I guess my concern would be, while many students have smartphones, many students don't have unlimited data, and I'm just concerned about hardship. So is there some other kind of way to be flexible around that would be the first question. But also, is there any way to delay the high school run, or no, because of elementary school?
Just to answer your question briefly, we do have MiFi hotspots on buses. They can take up to about 15 devices at one time. We have to be cognizant of the number of devices on each one, but there are options, and we do have MiFi bus hotspots for buses.
Awesome.
Brandy, other questions?
Okay, and then I just have a question about staffing. You were saying that you might have to hire more teachers. Would these teachers be instructional in that they have their own classrooms, or are they supervising students that are in a quote-unquote overflow classroom, and those students are watching their teacher on a screen?
The answer to that is both. So at our K-5 level right now, we have several remote learning teachers. So for example, on RTI/AIS, teachers are teaching full remote students. So what we have is, if some of their students come back, let's say they have 60 students that they're teaching full virtual and 20 students choose to come back. At our third grade level right now, as an example, there are at this point in time, and maybe I could be speaking out of turn, I haven't talked to Mrs. Rossetti today about this, but we were fully maxed out in all our classrooms. So if we had 10 full virtual students at the third grade level come back, we would need another classroom for those students. And we're really specifically talking about K-6, where those problems exist as of now. More so at the 7-12 level, there could be an overflow room or two where they would rotate in every few days if we ran into that situation. Does that make sense?
Any board members online have any questions? I had one. The slide you showed with the number of students in each category, fully virtual, going to be full in person. You still had hybrid students, correct? So the challenges that you have now are going to be amplified if those hybrid students change their mind. So can they change their mind at any time? I know virtual students, fully virtual students have to commit to a certain quarter by quarter, I believe. So with hybrid students, can a parent just say, no, I'd like my child to come back full-time tomorrow?
Yeah, we've really, those challenges have gone on for us, and those are challenges that we relish. So if we can accommodate, we have tried to accommodate all along the way. This has been something that we've been faced with week by week. The principals meet, and as well as when the numbers were higher in the pandemic, when parents wanted to go remote with their students, they met with their principals, the guidance counselors, explaining kind of that situation as well. We are faced, when you look at the numbers, when you look at the all virtual, those hybrid families will have to elect at that point in time. When we send it out next week, they will have to elect if they want to come back full-time as well as the full remote. We don't expect all students to come back, but boy, it's a great problem to have if you don't have space, because it's not that we don't have space in the classroom, we just need another room for space. We've already gone through all of our classrooms and we've looked at what furniture can be put in different locations now. Some of our classrooms are filled with furniture that have been moved out to be able to support our students. We have locations enough in our buildings to be able to house our students, but we may have staffing issues that are needed to be here at that point in time, as well as transportation components that we'll work through at that 4th through 8th level. But if you remember the slide, the K-5 students, the majority of our students are here and our rooms are full. It's more, I don't know if that answered your question.
So particularly in the high school, when you still had 11 graders that were staying hybrid, 15 of them changed their mind next week. Can they do that?
We would accommodate those students if we could in the classrooms, yes. Yep. And the same thing at the middle school as well.
Any other questions? So, great program has been going on. Thank you very much for all your efforts and getting the kids back. It's great. And the picture you showed earlier was nice to see the classroom a little full. I hear from my tutor in high school that someone had 3 kids in the class, 5 kids in the class, so you see 20, it looks good. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ready for open forum now? We're at the point of the meeting for open forum, where we encourage the public participation. So there will be 2 open forums this evening to provide opportunities to address the Board of Education. We ask participants who wish to speak during the first open forum to type their name in the chat box, and when called upon, identify yourself and, if applicable, the organization that you are representing. Just so we're clear, we ask all speakers to identify the school-related matter, topic to be discussed. In order to conduct district business in a smooth, orderly, and timely manner, open forum is limited to a maximum of 30 minutes. with 3 minutes allocated to each speaker. And just so the Board of Education does appreciate the public attendance at these meetings and your participation. So with that, do we have anybody signed up?
Yes, Mr. Mannix, we have Jen Bremser. Jen, go ahead and unmute yourself and address the board.
Good evening, I'm Jen Bremser. I'm a parent, alumni, and a fellow educator, and I want to speak tonight about the proposed budget increase. As you know, this month, our kids are participating in PARP, which was created to cement the bond between home and the school to encourage the love of reading in our children. The initiative is led by the New York State PTA, who state, learning to read is the single most important activity in a child's education. In the spirit of PARP, I'd like to share that in 2019, 38% of Queensbury third graders were reading below grade level. In contrast, the National Center for Education Statistics show that only 2.3 of Queensbury students are identified with a disability. That means that in Queensbury, prior to COVID, 1 out of every 3 students that don't have an underlying disability were not reading at grade level. Why? It could be that as a district, we aren't properly identifying students that have learning disabilities in reading. Alternatively, it could suggest that our methods of teaching need to be reevaluated to align with the body of evidence on effective reading instruction that meets the needs of the widest possible range of students. When a curriculum is effective, about 80% of kids reach grade level in Tier 1 general education curriculums. Tonight, I'm representing the families that trust the district to make good decisions with their kids' best interests in mind, the families that demonstrate this trust with a vote of yes on proposed budget increases. I'm here to speak for families that don't have the thousands of dollars needed to obtain private evaluations and tutoring for their struggling readers. Over the last 5 years, I voted yes without hesitation on every 3% budget increase. This year, Queensbury is proposing a budget that exceeds the state tax cap, which requires approval by a supermajority or 60% of voters. Before I vote, I am here to respectfully ask the board members 3 questions. First, have you considered less costly, more effective alternatives to the Teachers College Readers and Writers Workshop? Some of our country's top literacy experts reviewed the program in 2020 and pointed out multiple problems. When Lucy Calkins, founder of this program, learned of this, she advised school leaders to keep quiet about it. She said, quote, "If the report happens to go under the radar, let's let it stay there." End quote. Oh wait, not end quote. Be forewarned, but don't amplify it by sharing. End quote. She added, "It's long, detailed, and not pretty." I shared a copy of this 65-page report with school leaders in January. Second, will you commit to collecting data on foundational skill development for all K-2 students at Queensbury and use this data to guide decisions about curricular changes? And finally, earlier this year, you held extra meetings to discuss the data on the risks and benefits of high-risk sports. Are you willing to do the same for effective reading instruction? Thank you. And I'm looking forward to hearing your response for these questions.
Thank you, Dr. Bremser.
Next up, Mr. Mannix, is James Ward. James, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Good evening. Just quick question. We had talked about the return of as many of these students back to the classroom. Was there a notification sent out to those who elected to come back for those grades? And I know there was a form and a survey where with those that elected to come back. Was there a notification saying to return and when to return, or the details of it? That's all.
Mr. Reiniger.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the question, Mr. Ward. Yes, we're in the process of contacting and working with families to discuss the return, whether the transportation needs are needed, and then also working with our school counselors to look at spaces in classrooms. And I have a meeting tomorrow with our communications department to get some correspondence out to families, hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow, with return information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
have Christina Tucker. Christina, go ahead and unmute yourself and address the board.
Good evening. My name is Christina Tucker, and I have 3 children in the Queensbury School District. I'm here tonight for a few reasons. First, I would like to express my deepest concern for conduct happening on the district's school buses. And after the presentation tonight, I'm even more concerned with adding more students to these chaotic environments. I read under your school board and duties regulation that as the governing body of the school district, you provide for a secure and healthful environment for staff and students by means that include ensuring quality in facilities and transportation services for students. In addition to many COVID violations I observed on a bus video, I want you to be aware of bullying, harassment, discrimination, intimidation, and violence happening on the school buses currently, all which are in violation of your student conduct policies. I am here to ask you for the reason for the new sexual harassment policies on the board agenda tonight as well. But before you answer that question, I would like to finish out my allotted 3 minutes. And Board of Education, I'd like to read one of your goals adopted in 2020, which states all members of the school community will maintain a campus-wide environment that fosters safety, empathy, and wellness. And if you truly care for the safety and well-being of students in the Queensbury School District, I ask that you take a close look at the facts and information within a current complaint that does not align with your current sexual harassment policy. Upon discovery of the incompetence and negligence associated, I hope that you make changes that need to happen. And while I expect my passion and persistence to be associated with a thorn in your side, I want you to know my intentions are pure. And I asked to speak with you privately, but you did not want to do that. We teach our children that if they see something wrong, say something. We teach our children to stand up to bullies and to let their voices be heard. I stand here tonight to project a voice for those that cannot protect themselves, the children of this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Tucker.
Jim Kosha. Jim, go ahead and unmute yourself and address the board.
Hello there. I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Kosha, you're good.
Okay. The idea of kids riding home on the bus in the middle school, and you said something about using their own phones. We're making an assumption that kids have phones, or can they use their Chromebooks if they were to take lessons on the bus? Thank you.
John, I think you answered it.
Yeah.
And use the Chromebooks because there's a Wi-Fi on every bus.
Yes.
Up to 15 devices.
That's
approximately.
Yes, that's correct. That's all we have, Mr. Mannix.
Thank you. Okay, we'll proceed with the business items, please. Mr. Whittemore.
Recommend the board approve business item A related to the budget hearing, a budget notice as presented. I'll note that this requires a roll call vote.
Can I get a motion for business item A, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Amy. Tim, second.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Whittemore.
Trustee Cabana? Aye. Trustee Flaherty?
Aye.
Trustee Holzer?
Aye.
Trustee Mannix?
Aye.
Trustee Shea?
Aye.
Trustee Malloy?
Aye.
Trustee Weaver?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Motion passes.
Recommend that the board approve business item B, motion related to the SECRO resolution regarding the 2021 capital project involving roof system replacements and improvement, designing, purchasing, installation of furniture at the middle school as presented. And this is also a roll call vote.
Thank you. May I have a motion, please? Thank you, Ms. Holzer. Second?
Second.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Any discussion on motion B? Hearing none, we'll take the roll call vote, please.
Trustee Cabana? Aye. Trustee Flaherty?
Aye.
Trustee Holzer?
Aye.
Trustee Mannix?
Aye.
Trustee Malloy?
Aye.
Trustee Shay?
Aye.
Trustee Weaver?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Recommend that the board approve business consent items C through B.
Before I take a motion, do any of the items C through B need to be removed? Hearing none, I'll take a motion, please.
So move, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. Kathy, second. No discussion. All in favor on the business consent items C through B, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Mr. Gannon?
Thank you, Mr. Mannix. If we could, back on S, on the business consent agenda item, was the motion to approve the appointment of Daniel Miller, Coordinator of Buildings and Grounds. I know tonight we have Mr. Miller with us, so I'd like to give him a warm welcome, as we usually do for our employees. Dan's coming back to us after being at Corinth for over the last 3 years as the Superintendent of Buildings and Grounds. So Dan, welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to come back.
So Dan will be starting with us on the 29th of March. Under the educational items, I recommend the board move to approve action item A, motion to accept the resignation for retirement purposes of Tina Bureau, WHBI grade 5 teacher.
Have a motion, please.
So moved.
Thank you. Second, please.
Second.
Mike?
Yep.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes.
I recommend the board move to approve action item B, motion to accept the resignation for retirement purposes of Pearl Floric, QES grade 1 teacher.
So moved. Tim?
Tim, second?
Second.
Thank you, Brad. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes.
I recommend the board move to approve action item C, motion to accept the resignation for retirement purposes of Susan Hummel, QMS math teacher, with sincere appreciation and regret for all three. I apologize.
Motion, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Kathy. Second?
Second.
I think I got Fran up here. A second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
I recommend the board move to approve action item D, the motion to approve the long-term substitute appointment of Tanya Hartman, assignment QES elementary teacher.
Have a motion, please?
So
Is that Fran? Yeah. Yes, thank you, Fran. Second, please.
Second.
Thank you, Kathy. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
I recommend the board move to approve educational consent items E through J.
Before we accept the motion, do any of the consent items E through J need to be removed? Hearing none, can I get a motion, please, for the consent items?
So moved.
Thank you, Kathy. A second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Fran. All in favor of the consent items E through J, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Consent agenda E through J passes. Next, we have board committee reports. I believe we had the safety committee met. Is anyone able to know? Not the safety committee met. Is anyone able to report on that? Mr. Whittemore?
I can speak briefly to it. We are working on a subcommittee to explore remediating the accidents that might occur on campus. For example, like a slip and fall or these type of areas that are frequent issues. And we're working on a walkthrough through one of the district's locations, as well as a tabletop exercise before the year's over.
Thank you. Any other committee reports? Amy? Do you have a committee report?
Sorry, I was hearing a lot of feedback. Actually, I have to apologize because I did miss the last committee meeting, but I do know from previous committee meeting and from follow-up that I just wanted to bring attention to there is some wellness resources and some recreational resources now posted on the website as part of the District Health Advisory Committee. They pulled together a list of things that families can do and participate in, both for physical and mental health. So that was added to the website, and that will be updated and added to regularly. Just wanted to bring attention to that.
Thank you, Ian. That's great. Any other committees? Okay, next, board member comments. Any comments? Okay. I'm sorry, Mr. Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Mannix. Tomorrow on campus, we are very fortunate. We will be holding a vaccination clinic for our staff. And I believe there's almost 70 staff members that will be receiving the Johnson & Johnson vaccination here tomorrow. So special thanks to the Williams family, Coach Williams and his wife. His wife helped us obtain this clinic through Walgreens. So they will be here tomorrow, and over 70 staff members will be, or approximately 70 staff members will be receiving their dose. Mrs. Trollstra worked very hard on this topic. Mrs. Tubbs, our high school lead nurse, so we're very happy to let the board know that that's taking place here in the Queensbury room tomorrow.
That's good news. No other board member comments? Time for our second open forum.
Yes, we do have one person signed up right now, Tim Moshe. Jim, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I have two questions. One, dealing with absentee ballots. Last year, many people in the district were able to use absentee ballots. Do we know how that's going to work this year? And the second question is running for the school board. Last year, you did not have to get your petition signed by a certain number of people. Do we know if that's going to be the case this year? The state waived that last year. Thank you.
So the first question on absentee ballots, there is a link on our website related to requesting an absentee ballot. We don't expect the process to be the same as last year, where everyone will be given an absentee ballot, but members can either follow that link, which has an email related to it, or call the district office, 824-5604, and we can provide absentee ballots. The question about the petition needed is somewhat of an unknown. Last year, with a higher participation due to the fact that it was all absentee ballot. So typically, if you were to take 2% of approximately 80 signed petitions would be needed. Last year, that was waived. And typically, the number is closer to 25. So at this point, as far as my understanding, it's still open, but we are communicating people who pick up packets that it could be that higher number, closer to 80 in terms of signed petitions.
I did read a memo that the governor signed. It's the higher 25 signatures for 2% of the number of voters of 2019. They were recognizing the increase in response from last year, and that was going to be a significant number. So they signed something, I think, this morning that would say whatever 2018 results were.
So that would be for 25.
That's okay. Anyone else, Mr. Berger?
I don't see anybody in minutes.
Okay. We do have a need for executive session this evening. So just before we go in, I want to thank everyone for attending again. We do have a nice number of participation. We appreciate the participation and look forward to seeing you and hearing you at each of the meetings. But I do like to get a motion to go into executive session pursuant to section 108.3 of the Open Meetings Law to discuss matters made confidential by federal or state law involving students pursuant to FERPA and attorney-client privilege pursuant to section 4503 of the New York Civil Practice Law and Rules. Can I have a motion, please? Thank you, Kathy. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Fran. No discussion? All in favor? Indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank you all.